It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver on Wednesdays, but Mondays, well, they're for me to talk about monster movies. It's time to continue the Gamera series. 1965's Gamera the Giant Monster was a smash success. Japan was monster crazy at the time. You had Godzilla stomping around. You had Mothra flying around, shooting webs at people. You've got like Rodan flapping his wings and knocking stuff over. Even Ghidra was now around. Gamera was just the next guy up. But it wasn't just that. 1966 was also the beginning of the Ultraman series too. So if it was big, if it could fight, and if it could possibly do some sort of karate move, Japan was eating it up. It had to be a pretty wonderful time, if you ask me. But for Gamera, his 1965 introduction went over quite well, so a sequel was ordered up ASAP. Now, if you go back just a couple of weeks and check out what I had to say about Godzilla Raids Again, it was a sequel that was ordered up within 2 weeks of the release of the original Godzilla film, and Godzilla Raids Again didn't fare too well. Gamera's follow-up, Gamera vs. Barugon, was released only 6 months after Gamera the Giant Monster. It would almost seem like history was doomed to repeat itself. Now, Gamera's first film, and many of the films of the Showa era of the series, was directed by Noriaki Yuasa. Now, much like with Ishiro Honda after the original Godzilla, Yuasa was not available to get the sequel made in the speed required by the studio. So directing duties went to Shigeo Tanaka, but is Gamera vs. Barugon as much of a disappointment as Godzilla Raids Again was? Well, it was one of the very few films that had been featured twice on Mystery Science Theater 3000, once in its local Minnesota run in the Twin Cities, and again after they were picked up by Comedy Central. What's more was that this film never played theatrically in the United States. It did make the rounds on television with the title War of the Monsters, but the very best known version is from 1987 once Sandy Frank came along to conduct a better dub.
Come on everybody, let's do the Sandy Frank song. Sandy Frank, Sandy Frank, he's the source of all our pain. Sandy Frank, Sandy Frank. Woo!
Ultimately, the film was not very well received. And I find that kind of interesting that they knew this would likely be the case, because I'm assuming most people remember just like 10 or so years previous when Godzilla sequel didn't do all that, all that hot. So another point often brought up is that Gamera is not in much of this film. He's only got a handful of minutes of screen time. In addition, this film is a whopping 100 minutes. It's 15 to 20 minutes longer than almost all the other films in the series during that earliest era. Hell, there aren't any Godzilla movies during that same era that approach that kind of runtime. So if you really think about it, it's longer, it's kind of rushed, and headlining star is hardly in it. It feels like that they may have just been taking another script and then turned it into a Gamera movie. And I can make that last statement because the movie opened 6 months after the completion of the previous film, with Gamera being released from his little space capsule that people tricked him to go into and then launched his ass off into, off-world so that they no longer had to deal with him. And he lands and blows up a power plant because, well, he is pissed off that people shot him off into space and stuff. So then the movie shifts to a movie about a veteran of World War II sending a trio of mercenaries, one of which is his younger brother, to a cave on an island to retrieve this super large opal he once found as a POW. And it's at this point that I suddenly smell a script about either retrieving an opal or stealing an opal and gutting it to turn it into a monster movie. And pardon me for having such a cynical outlook of how this is very likely the case, but this happened a lot back then, and I mean a lot. Several of Toho's monster films, some with Godzilla, some with other creatures, were originally written as something else and then got gutted, repurposed, and turned into a monster movie to make money off of it and keep a franchise going. But anyway, when the mercenaries land on the island, they find a tribe living there, and they want to use one of the natives as a guide, but the only person in the tribe that knows how to speak Japanese just so turns out to be a really pretty island girl. They aren't the only Japanese people there either. There's an old doctor who's lived there for about a decade. He made friends with the islanders because he cured them of an epidemic. And he offers up the island girl who can speak the language. And this kind of cracks me up. Her name is Karen. Yep, Karen. Not like, Suki or anything that would seemingly be, either an islander name or a Japanese name. No, it's Karen. It's just Karen. Anyway, they explain where they want to go, but the doc and Karen warn them off and say that they must not go there. And they say other things like, oh, you won't find anything there. It's dangerous or whatever. Just kind of don't go there is pretty much all they really keep saying to them. But the mercenaries being mercenaries, and the one guy in particular, believe that if they really don't want them to go to the cave, they must be hiding some really good stuff there. So the mercenaries carry on without a guide, and they eventually find the cave and a pretty scary carving of what appears to be a monster in the wall. They do eventually find the opal, but one of them is stung by a deadly scorpion and dies. And while one of the surviving mercenaries, the younger brother of the guy who sent them, mourns the death of that guy, the third double crosses him and takes the opal and tries to create a cave-in to trap the mourner. And eventually that guy is dug out of the cave by the natives, and Karen realizes that they found something. Something about yay big round and looks like an opal. And she is seemingly a combination of pissed and shocked about what they found. And Karen eventually reveals that she hasn't seen the thing that they found, but she is as certain as can be that it is not an opal. And sure enough, while on the way back, the man who made off with the discovery, Onodera, accidentally exposes the opal to infrared and it changes. And it's revealed to be an egg that births a little reptile creature named Barugon. The creature tears its way out of the ship, and the ship eventually explodes in the flames. Now, Onodera tells the men, and particularly the main guy, Kano, who hired him, that the other two died, and the opal must have just fallen into the bay, but that he can hire a team of divers to find it. And speaking of the bay, some bubbling starts up and out comes Barugon, and he's full-sized and none too happy about being in a strange place. He's a quadruped with a horn at the end of his nose, an extendable tongue, and a back covered with spikes that are kind of pulsating when glowing. Oh, and he also has a penchant for messing up some buildings, because of course he does. Now, while Barugon makes his way from city to city, Onodera accidentally lets it slip that he killed two men for that opal. And that man who hired him, Kano, and like I said, is the older brother of one of the other guys that went there, Kesuke. So he's none too happy. And Onodera eventually overpowers Kano and kills him and his wife before escaping. Now, Barugon rampages through the city and reveals not just his ability to knock down buildings with his legs and his long tongue, but his tongue can also fire out freezing gas. Oh, and he also spouts a rainbow from his back that disintegrates almost anything that could pose a threat to him. The good news, though, is that Gamera shows up and plans to show Barugon a thing or two about manners, but after yelling at each other for about 32 minutes, Barugon launches himself at Gamera and starts whipping him in the face with his tail. Now, Gamera tries to light Barugon on fire, but he just fights back by freezing Gamera with his tongue gas. And yeah, it's, come to think of it, I write down these notes, I write down these things to say, and I say them in these shows, and I realize that tongue gas is something that is a real thing in a movie. Anyway, Barugon checks to see if the frozen Gamera is dead, and Gamera stabs Barugon in the face with his claws before passing out and being tipped over onto his back. So I guess Barugon knows stuff about how normal turtles operate. Now, Kasuke and Karen arrive in Japan, and she's pretty darn upset that it is Barugon and is fairly sure it's too late and they're all going to die. But still, she demands to be taken to where Barugon is. Now, Kasuke surprises Onodera and tells him that it wasn't a jewel, but it was an egg of a monster. They fight, and eventually Kasuke ties Onodera up, and he and Karen go to try to convince the defense ministry to lure Barugon to the water with this gigantic diamond. And if he's in the water for an extended period of time, his weapons will be useless and he'll basically become inert. Now, the diamond plan originally doesn't work, and the reason why is that Barugon is actually bigger than he's supposed to be. The infrared light that Barugon, or that Onodera exposed the egg to, mutated Barugon and made it big enough to where even a 5,000 carat diamond isn't holding his attention. So it's time for Plan B, which involves a death ray, but instead of a ruby being used to produce the ray, it is configured to use the diamond in infrared light. It works to bring Barugon to the edge of the lake, but Onodera comes speedboating in to steal the diamond from the boat full of people. Lucky for everyone, though, Barugon needed a little bit of a snack and snatches up Onodera with his tongue. Now, unfortunately for everyone, though, there's no longer any diamond to bring Barugon all the way into the water to be shut down. Later, Kasuke figures out, after seeing the rearview mirrors left where an army jeep was disintegrated, that Barugon's rainbow has a weakness to mirrors and to its reflections. So Kasuke comes up with the idea to build a giant mirror to deflect Barugon's rainbow back to him. This works as the light that is reflected back cuts up Barugon pretty good. And he's definitely injured pretty badly, but it doesn't kill him. Kasuke says that they need him to shoot another rainbow at him, but Karen says he won't do that because, science. If animals get hurt by something they do, they'll never do it again. Now, I'm not really an expert on Barugons, but if they are anything like cats, they will constantly do shit that will hurt themselves over and over and over again. But that's not to worry, because good news is that they don't need to make him do a thing he doesn't want to do again, because Gamera unfreezes just in time to put this movie to bed. He does his turbo fart flying trick and shows up to give Barugon what for. He does a little tail pull, a little fire, some farty jet spinny stuff, and then rams into Barugon. He eventually throws Barugon into the lake and drags him under by his neck. Now, everyone assumes Barugon's dead and watch Gamera fly off victorious. And by victorious, I do mean he's laughing all the way to the bank to cash his giant check for being in about 15 minutes of this movie. All right, let's get to my 3 things I like about Gamera versus Barugon. First, oddly enough, I actually really like the story of the mercenaries. Yes, it was a story that doesn't seem to fit properly in this movie. It's something I would have liked a whole movie about, with these guys looking for this opal, and have it be something like an Indiana Jones movie full of adventure and thrills. There is some really good character moments here, though. Like, there's a really sweet moment with Kasuke, who was mourning the death of the man stung by the scorpion. And he finds in that guy's pocket a picture of him with his mother when he was a little kid, and he kind of carries it around with him. And, it's just a nice little scene, and it's really made clear that Kasuke has a conscience, and it's a fine way to make him a hero. And this whole scene with the 3 who are all doing this for different reasons makes for a decent little adventure. The only problem is that it's a Gamera movie, and it doesn't really belong here. But what is here isn't bad at all. In fact, Kasuke is a really decent dude in this movie, and he cares about the guy who got killed by the scorpion. He wants the army people to listen to this island girl with a plan to lure a giant reptile to the lake with a giant diamond so he won't shoot rainbows at people anymore. And I said tongue gas earlier, and then I'm talking about an island girl with a giant diamond leading a reptile to a watery grave so he won't shoot his rainbows at people anyway. Man, I have a strange job here, people. But, he feels really bad about going on the mission to find the egg in the first place. And he's just a good dude. And as I said, that part is weird in the movie, but it ultimately helps bring the hero to the front and center as well. Now, Barugon himself is my second thing I like. Okay, yes, the Gamera creatures were often much cheaper looking, but sometimes that led to more interesting things. In one movie, a creature has a knife for a face and uses it to cut up another monster. Here, Barugon has that tongue. It can extend to knock stuff over, but it can also work like a fire extinguisher by spraying freeze gas. And to top it all off, it also has a way to emit rainbows from his back that acts as a defense mechanism against attacks, mostly attacks from above, but pretty much he uses it as like his Omega weapon, if you will. The scene in which we find his defense mechanism starts off with the Japanese preparing for an attack on Barugon from beyond the range of his tongue, and they decide to launch missiles at it because he's just sleeping on the road in the town that he just messed up, and he's all tuckered out. But he senses the launch and decides to blow up the missiles and makes the cars and stuff disappear. It's weird, it's fascinating, and Barugon sleeping so soundly before he realizes something's up is actually kind of cute. Now, finally, the character of Onodera is utterly bonkers. And he's the guy who ultimately tries to kill Casque and make off with the opal and all of that. But he's basically a cartoon supervillain. He was all about that opal on the island. He tried killing 2 people for it. He's obsessive over it. And after he kills his employer and refuses to believe the jewel was an egg, he then learns about a 5,000 carat diamond that will be used to lure Barugon to the water. So what's he think? Well, of course he wants that diamond. And he's always believed that the island was hiding more than the opal. So he obviously there are riches to be found there. But what makes this so hilarious to me, the whole goddamn world is basically on fire around him. Barugon is rampaging through every city. Oh, and Gamera is back too. This dude is so obsessed over riches and jewels that he doesn't even give 2 shits that Barugon and Gamera could basically destroy all of Japan. And of course, I'm sure there are people who would love to gain as many riches as they can, even with the world on fire around them. I mean, shit, it's happening today in the real world. But it's so heavy-handed in this movie, it just kills me. Dude even storms a goddamn boat full of army people and other guys with a single revolver and steals the diamond from them as they are about to do away with Barugon. He's utterly insane, and it's kind of those little things like that sometimes makes a movie or a character just ultra fun. Well, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later. And don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on FilmSeizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. You can also check out new posts at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday.
Let's go, Gamera. 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 Gamera is really neat. Gamera is filled with meat. We've been eating Gamera. Shell, teeth, eyes, flames, claws, breath.